It's strange how one moment can turn everything upside down. That Christmas, I had no idea that what was supposed to be a peaceful, happy holiday would end up being the catalyst for a storm that would shake our entire family. The house was full of the usual Christmas chaos. My mom running around making sure everything was perfect, my dad nursing a glass of whiskey by the fireplace, and the smell of turkey filling the air. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, not because of the gifts or the food, though those were nice, but because it was one of the few times we all gathered together as a family. It felt like a time to reconnect, to laugh, to forget about everything else and just enjoy being in each other's company. I had everything ready. I was on top of it all this year, after months of planning. I had bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, things I knew they'd love. I had spent hours wrapping them with care, picked out the perfect decorations, and even helped Mom set up the dining room. I thought everything was going to go perfectly, like it always had before. And then, of course, my sister Sophie had to show up. Sophie had always been the golden child in the family, the one who could do no wrong. She was the one everyone adored, the one who could walk into a room and light it up with just a smile. I used to admire that about her, the way she could make everything seem so effortless. But as I got older, something in me started to resent it. I was always in her shadow, never good enough, never the one people noticed. But that Christmas, I didn't expect her to go as far as she did. I didn't expect her to humiliate me in front of the whole family. It started off harmless enough, just a few snide comments here and there, jokes at my expense that everyone seemed to laugh at. But when she started talking about my career, or lack thereof, things took a sharp turn. "Not everyone can be as successful as me, huh?" Sophie said, laughing as she sipped her wine. "But don't worry, I'm sure your job at the bookstore is fulfilling enough." The room went silent for a second, the clinking of silverware the only sound. I looked up, shocked by how easily she had cut me down. But I laughed it off, tried to brush it aside with a joke, but inside I felt my chest tighten. I could already feel the familiar sting of her words, that old wound reopening. But she didn't stop. "And I mean, come on," Sophie continued, eyes gleaming with a kind of venom disguised as playful teasing. "You can't really be expecting much this Christmas, right? We all know how tight your finances are. It's cute that you're still trying to keep up with the rest of us." Her words were like daggers. I had known it was coming, knew she'd have something to say about my financial struggles. She always did. But the way she said it, so casually, as if it were just another harmless jab, made it worse. It wasn't just a comment. It was an attack. The rest of the family didn't notice. They never did. Mom was too busy setting the table, Dad too deep in his own world to care. But I could see the smiles on their faces as they nodded along to Sophie's words. I felt completely invisible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at her, to lash out in some way. But I stayed silent, my fists clenched under the table, my mind racing for a way to escape the humiliation. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Sophie leaned over and whispered in my ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should try a different career, you know? Something a little more glamorous. You know, something that doesn't make you look like a failure." The words hit me harder than I could have anticipated. I wanted to stand up and leave, to run away from it all. But instead I stayed in my seat, the world spinning around me, trying to keep my composure. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, unable to look anyone in the eye. My heart was pounding in my chest, my stomach in knots. I wanted to cry, to shout at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, how her words were poisoning our relationship. But all I could do was sit there, numb. Then, as if nothing had happened, Sophie turned back to the rest of the family, her smile wide and bright. "So, Mom, what's for dessert?" she asked, the picture of innocence. And just like that, everything went back to normal. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't the sister I had grown up with. This wasn't the loving, caring Sophie I had once admired. No, this was a version of her that I had never seen before, the one who had no problem cutting me down to make herself feel superior. As the evening dragged on, I could barely keep my composure. The holiday cheer felt fake, the laughter hollow. I couldn't wait for it all to be over. I needed to get out of that house, away from Sophie, and away from the suffocating weight of the way she made me feel. But what I didn't know was that this Christmas would be the start of something bigger. Turning point in my life. Because while Sophie thought she had the upper hand, she had no idea what I was planning. No idea that, in the end, it would be her who would regret crossing me. After Christmas, the bitterness didn't go away. It settled in my stomach like an unwelcome guest, lingering there long after the holiday decorations had been packed up and the New Year celebrations were over. Sophie's words haunted me, replaying in my head at the worst possible moments. And it wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, so casually, as if she had the right to diminish me in front of everyone. The hardest part was the silence that followed. No one, least of all Sophie, acknowledged what had happened that evening. It was as though I had been the only one who had felt the sting of her words. I couldn't help but wonder if the rest of the family was oblivious, or if they just didn't care. In the weeks that followed, Sophie's behavior didn't improve. If anything, it worsened. Every time we interacted, she made a point to remind me of my shortcomings. The mocking glances, the passive-aggressive comments, the constant need to make herself the center of attention. It all added up. I knew that every time she opened her mouth, she was pushing me further away from her. I couldn't take it anymore. I knew that if I let this continue, I would be stuck in this miserable cycle, always looking over my shoulder, always second-guessing myself. So I started avoiding her. I made excuses not to show up to family gatherings. I started pulling away from the people who knew what was going on, afraid they'd take her side. The more I isolated myself, the more I realized I wasn't just avoiding Sophie. I was avoiding the truth about myself. I had spent so long trying to please people, to live up to expectations that weren't even mine. I had never really asked myself what I wanted. What did I need to feel fulfilled? What made me feel like I was truly living? I couldn't let Sophie's words define me anymore. I had to find a way to get my power back. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Sophie wasn't just making these comments to hurt me. She was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me question everything I had done. But I was smarter than that. She didn't realize it, but I had been taking notes. Every single thing she had said, every little dig, every moment of ridicule. I had been storing it in my mind, quietly calculating my next move. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not anymore. The next time I saw Sophie, it was at a family dinner. I had been avoiding these gatherings for weeks, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't hide forever. I had to face her, to show her that I wasn't the weak person she thought I was. The evening started like any other. We all gathered at Mom's house, the familiar smells of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes filling the air. The noise of my relatives talking and laughing filled the space, but I felt the familiar tension building up between Sophie and me. She was already seated at the head of the table, the seat she always claimed without question. The golden child. The one everyone turned to, as if she were the sun and we were all just planets revolving around her. I walked into the room with my head held high, determined to make a statement without saying a word. It had changed. I was different now. I wasn't going to let Sophie get away with diminishing me any longer. Mom greeted me with a warm hug, her voice full of concern. "I'm so glad you came, sweetheart. We've missed you." I smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and took my seat at the table, directly across from Sophie. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "So," Sophie said, her voice dripping with that faux sweet tone I had come to despise. "How's work going?" "Still at the bookstore." The question hung in the air, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The same question over and over like a broken record. But this time I wasn't going to let it bother me. I looked straight at Sophie, meeting her gaze with a calmness that surprised even me. "Yes, I'm still at the bookstore," I said, my voice steady. "And actually, I'm thinking of branching out and opening my own business. It's been something I've been considering for a while now." There was a noticeable pause in the room. Sophie blinked, clearly taken aback. For a split second, I saw the doubt in her eyes, the flicker of insecurity. She wasn't expecting that response. She expected me to shrink away, to stutter or apologize for my career choices. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I've learned that it's never too late to pursue something new. And honestly, I don't think I've ever been this excited about a project in my life. Sophie recovered quickly, though the hint of tension in her smile didn't go unnoticed. Well, that's nice, I guess. I'm sure it'll work out for you. If you ever find the time. Her words were sharp, but this time they didn't cut through me. They just bounced off. I could see the doubt in her eyes now, the way she was struggling to keep up her perfect image. She thought she had the power to make me feel small, but I was starting to see through her. Before I could respond, Mom interjected, trying to keep the peace. All right, enough about work, she said with a gentle laugh. Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? But I wasn't done yet. As the dinner continued, I caught Sophie making several more passive-aggressive comments, each one directed at me. But every time, I met her with a calm response, refusing to let her get under my skin. Later that evening, as the night wore on and people started to trickle out of the house, I found myself standing at the door, ready to leave. Sophie approached me, her expression colder than I had ever seen it. You know, she began, her voice low, I really don't know why you're trying so hard to prove yourself. You'll never be good enough. No matter how much you try to impress Mom and Dad, you'll always be in my shadow. I looked at her, my heart pounding, but this time there was no fear, no self-doubt, just clarity. You're wrong, I said quietly. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, least of all you. I've spent my whole life trying to meet your standards, but I'm done. I'm building my own life, my own future. And I don't need your approval to do that. For a moment, Sophie just stared at me, her mouth slightly open in shock. But I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out the door, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from her. I wasn't shrinking into the background. I was finally standing up for myself. And it felt damn good. The days after that family dinner felt like a quiet victory. I hadn't expected anything to change overnight, but the satisfaction of finally standing up for myself lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't just about putting Sophie in her place. It was about me finding my own strength, something I hadn't even known I'd lost until that moment. The usual routine continued. I went to work at the bookstore, buried myself in my plans for the new business I was going to start, and spent time with friends who didn't judge me for my choices or try to tear me down. But every time I thought about Sophie, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. Would she retaliate? Would she finally snap and confront me, maybe in front of the family again? I'd braced myself for it. But what I didn't expect was the way she'd quietly begin to shift tactics. It wasn't an immediate confrontation. In fact, Sophie's behavior toward me seemed to change completely. She didn't make any snide remarks at the next few family gatherings, and she wasn't as quick to target me with passive-aggressive comments. At first, I didn't know how to read it. Was she finally backing off? Was she scared? Or was she just biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike? I had my suspicions. Sophie wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, but I told myself that I didn't care. She could sulk in silence for all I cared. I was moving on with my life, and nothing she said or did was going to stop me. Then one day I got a message. It was from Sophie, which was odd in itself. We hadn't really talked since Christmas, and I hadn't reached out to her either. The text was simple, almost apologetic. We need to talk. I felt a flicker of hesitation. I didn't want to get drawn into another manipulative game, but I couldn't help myself. I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. I thought I might finally be able to have a real conversation with her, to get to the heart of why she'd been so toxic for so long. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted Sophie immediately. She was sitting at a table by the window, her shoulders slightly hunched as if she were nervous, which wasn't like her at all. She was always the confident one, the one who knew how to command a room. But now there was something different about her. She looked smaller somehow. I sat down across from her, trying to gauge the situation before I said anything. Sophie didn't meet my eyes at first. She stared into her coffee cup, swirling it around with a quiet intensity. "You wanted to talk?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. Not now. She finally looked up, and for a split second, I could see the vulnerability in her eyes. Threw me off balance for a moment. Was this the Sophie I remembered, the one who used to be my best friend? The one who I had always trusted? Or was this just another act, another performance? I'm sorry for the way I've treated you," Sophie said, her voice quiet and hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about it lately. About everything. And I realize that I've been a terrible sister." I blinked, unsure of what to say. This wasn't what I had expected. I had thought she'd come in, guns blazing, ready to tear me down again. But here she was admitting fault. Or was she? Could this be another one of her tactics, a way to regain control of the situation? "I don't know what to say," I replied honestly. "I've been hurt by what you said, Sophie. And I can't just pretend like it didn't happen. It's not that easy." She nodded, her expression softening. "I know. Get that. But I've been thinking, and I just wanted you to know that I've been struggling too. It's not just about you, Em. It's about me too. I've been dealing with a lot of stuff I've never told anyone." This was a different side of Sophie. A side I hadn't seen before. The realization hit me slowly. Sophie wasn't the perfect, untouchable person I had always believed her to be. She had her own struggles, her own insecurities. Maybe, just maybe, she had been acting out because she was dealing with something I couldn't understand. But there was still a part of me that couldn't fully trust her. She had hurt me too many times for that. "I don't know if I can just forgive you," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's going to take time." "I understand," Sophie replied quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I wanted to at least say it. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between us. Felt like something had shifted. I wasn't sure what it was, whether it was genuine or just another part of Sophie's carefully crafted act. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the one at fault. I wasn't the one who had to apologize. Sophie's apology, whether it was sincere or not, was a small victory. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a step in the right direction. I could see that she was trying, at least in her own way. And maybe that was all I needed. For now. The days that followed Sophie's apology were a strange mix of relief and confusion. I didn't know how to process it. For so long I had been consumed with the idea of standing up to her, of taking my power back. Now that she had admitted her wrongs, I didn't know what came next. Was it enough? Could I forgive her, or was this just another game? What I did know was that the idea of revenge, of seeing Sophie pay for how she'd treated me, still lingered in the back of my mind. I hated admitting it to myself, but I couldn't help it. Every time she smiled that sickly sweet smile, every time she acted like she was trying to make things right, I felt the familiar sting. I wanted her to feel the pain I had felt. I wanted her to understand how it felt to be humiliated, to be the one always under her thumb. The opportunity came unexpectedly, like a flash of lightning in a dark sky. It started innocently enough. Sophie invited me to dinner one evening, just the two of us. She was trying, I could tell. And even though part of me was willing to give her a chance, the other part, the part that still carried the scars of Christmas, was skeptical. I agreed though, figuring that I should at least hear her out. Maybe we could finally put all of this behind us. Or at the very least I could figure out where we stood. The dinner was at a nice restaurant, an upscale Italian place with dim lighting and expensive wine. We sat across from each other in a quiet corner booth, the soft clinking of glasses and laughter from other tables forming a kind of background noise. Sophie was trying hard to appear casual, but I could see through it. Her nervousness was evident in the way she kept fidgeting with her napkin, her eyes flicking up at me with uncertainty every few seconds. She had been playing the role of the perfect sister for so long that I think she was starting to realize she had lost that title. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hand it back just yet. So, Sophie began, taking a deep breath. How are you? Really? I mean, I know I've been awful, and I don't expect you to just forgive me overnight, but I really do want to make things right. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I had been thinking a lot about this moment, about how I would respond, about what I wanted from her. I'm fine, I said, my voice steady but tinged with a hint of sadness. I'm getting better. But the thing is, Sophie, it's not just about your apology. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to be okay. It doesn't work like that. Her face fell for a second, the mask of confidence slipping. I know, she said quietly. I guess I've just been really messed up. And I don't know how to fix it. The old part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted to fall for the act, to let myself be swept up in the idea that we could go back to how things were. But the newer, stronger version of myself, the one who had finally found her voice, wasn't so quick to forget. You hurt me, Sophie, I said, my voice more resolute than I expected. You didn't just make a few offhand remarks. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I was always less than you. And I spent years trying to live up to something that wasn't even real. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at her plate, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but it wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. I know, she finally whispered. I'm sorry. I really am. The sincerity in her voice was there, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together. There was something still off. That's when the temptation hit me. I could easily turn this around. I could take what Sophie had just admitted, her guilt, her remorse, and use it against her. I could make her feel the same way she had made me feel. I could make her squirm, make her regret the way she'd treated me, show her that I wasn't going to let her get away with it so easily. A part of me wanted to do it. A part of me wanted to laugh in her face, to remind her of the humiliation she had caused me and to make her feel the same sting. It would be so easy, so satisfying. I could tear her down piece by piece, and let her know that I had control now. But as I looked at her, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of losing me. Fear of losing the one person who had always been there, even when she didn't deserve it. I could tell that Sophie wasn't just trying to make amends for the things she had said to me. She was trying to save herself, to fix the broken relationship between us. I realized then that my revenge wasn't going to come from making Sophie feel as small as I had felt. It wasn't going to come from tearing her down the way she had torn me apart. No, my revenge would be something far more powerful. It would be in rebuilding myself, in proving to both her and to myself that I didn't need her approval to be enough. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Sophie, I said, my voice calm but firm. But I'm not going to destroy you. That's not who I am. I'm done being the person you thought you could walk all over. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be your punching bag anymore either. Her eyes widened as if she hadn't expected that response. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or realization. But it was quickly replaced with the same old defensive look, the one that always seemed to hide her true emotions. Fine, she said, her tone flat. I get it. You don't have to forgive me if you don't want to. But I could see the cracks in her facade now. The tables had turned. She wasn't the one in control anymore. As we finished dinner in silence, I knew something had shifted between us. We weren't the same people anymore, and we would never go back to how we were. But the change didn't have to mean destruction. It didn't have to mean vengeance. The tables had turned, but in a way I hadn't anticipated. The power wasn't in making her feel small. It was in choosing to rise above it all. The next few weeks after that dinner with Sophie were filled with a quiet intensity. I'd held my ground, refused to give in to the temptation of revenge, and it felt empowering. But something else was slowly creeping up inside of me. It wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about everything I had been avoiding for so long, the truths I had buried, the secrets I hadn't wanted to face. What had happened between Sophie and me was just the surface of a much deeper issue. For years I had allowed myself to be caught in a pattern of comparison, of always trying to meet some invisible standard that Sophie and others set for me. But that wasn't the real problem. The real issue was the way I had allowed myself to be manipulated and controlled by the expectations of others, whether it was Sophie, my parents, or society at large. As I reflected on the years that had led to this moment, I realized that I had been living in a fog, blind to the truth. Sophie hadn't just made me feel small. I had allowed it. I had allowed her to define my worth. I had allowed her to make me feel like I wasn't good enough. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just her. It was everyone. They had all played a part in shaping who I was, in creating the version of me that was constantly second-guessing herself, constantly apologizing for existing. I had never fully taken control of my own narrative. The most painful truth I had to confront was the way I had neglected myself for so long. I had spent so much time catering to others, making sure Sophie was happy, making sure my parents were proud, making sure everyone else's needs were met, that I had ignored my own. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own self-worth, and for what? So many things about my life had been built on lies. The lies I told myself about who I was. The lies I believed about what success and happiness meant. And the worst part was, I had allowed those lies to dictate the way I lived. But I wasn't going to live that way anymore. It was around this time that something else happened, something that made me realize just how deep the dysfunction in our family ran. I had been spending more time with my parents, particularly my mom, who had seemed more withdrawn than usual after Christmas. She had been acting strangely, quieter than normal. I figured it was just the aftermath of the holidays, the stress, the family drama, but something about it didn't sit right with me. One night, as we sat in the living room together, Mom seemed unusually distant. I had asked her a few times if she was feeling okay, and each time she gave me a vague response. "I'm fine, honey," she'd say, but I could tell it wasn't true. That night, as we sat in silence, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. There was something she wasn't telling me. Something important. I decided to press her. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange for weeks." She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I've been dealing with some things," she finally admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "What things?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and sorrow. "I think it's time you knew the truth about something," she said quietly. "About your father. And me." The room seemed to freeze, the air thick with tension. I leaned forward, my heart racing in my chest. "What truth?" She sighed, her face creased with age and worry. "Your father and I. We've been having problems for a long time. We've kept it from you, from everyone. But we're not happy, Em. We haven't been for years." I stared at her in disbelief, unable to process what I was hearing. My parents, the ones who had always seemed like the perfect couple, were falling apart. How had I not known? Why hadn't anyone told me? "Mom," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something sooner?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want you to think badly of your father, of me. I thought I could handle it, that it was just a phase. But it's not. And it's been affecting everything, the way we live, the way we treat each other, and the way we treat you." The realization hit me hard. The tension in our family, the fights I had heard between them late at night, the distance between my mom and dad, it had all been a lie. They had been pretending for so long, hiding their unhappiness behind a perfect facade. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Em. For everything. For not being the mother you deserved." I sat there, stunned, my mind reeling with the weight of her confession. It wasn't just Sophie who had been holding me back. It was the entire foundation of my life. The walls had been built on secrets, on lies, on things left unsaid. And I had been too blind to see it. I reached out and took her hand, unsure of what to say. There were so many questions swirling in my mind. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed? How could everything I thought I knew about my family be a lie? But in that moment I realized something else. This was the moment I could no longer ignore. It was the moment I could no longer sit idly by, hoping things would fix themselves. I had to take control. I had to take back the power that had been stolen from me, not just by Sophie, but by everyone who had kept me in the dark. "Mom, it's okay," I said quietly, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "We'll figure this out. But I need to know, how do we move forward from here?" She looked at me, her expression filled with both sorrow and hope. "I don't know, honey. But I want to try. I want to be honest with you, with myself. And I want to start over. Together." In that moment something shifted. It wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about everything. It was about breaking free from the lies that had held me captive for so long. I wasn't going to let these secrets define me any longer. I wasn't going to let them control my future. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope flicker inside me. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. Maybe this was the moment the tables truly turned. The revelation about my parents' strained relationship felt like a punch to the gut. For years I had believed that our family was solid, that we were this perfect, unshakable unit. But now, everything I thought I knew was in question. The walls of security I had built around myself began to crumble, one brick at a time. My parents had been living in a facade, pretending everything was okay while their marriage fell apart. And I had been blind to it. That night, after the conversation with Mom, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Not just from Sophie but from everyone. How had they all kept this secret from me? Why hadn't they trusted me enough to be honest? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about my parents. It was about the way we all had been living under false pretenses. I had been caught in a similar web, living my life according to other standards, hiding my own insecurities and doubts, all while pretending to be someone I wasn't. Sophie's treatment of me wasn't the cause of my pain. It was merely a symptom of a much deeper problem, one that started in our family, but had spread to every part of my life. It was time for the truth. Time for all of us to face the reality we had been avoiding. The first step for me was confronting Sophie. I wasn't going to let this go any longer. Couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. A week after the dinner I reached out to her. I wasn't sure what kind of conversation this would be, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to know if her apology had been genuine or just another manipulation. We met again at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where you could sit for hours and not be interrupted. Sophie was already sitting at a table, looking more relaxed than I had seen her in a long time. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was still something distant about her, something cold. "Hey," she greeted me, her voice a little too chipper, but it didn't fool me. "It's good to see you." I nodded, sitting down across from her. The usual pleasantries were exchanged, but we both knew the real reason we were there. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," I started, my voice calm but firm. "And honestly, I'm not sure if I can just forget everything that's happened." Sophie's smile faltered for a split second before she quickly regained her composure. "I get it," she said, her fingers nervously tapping on the table. "But I'm really trying, Em. I know I've messed up, but I want to make things right. I really do." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied her, watching her every move, trying to determine if this was the real Sophie or just another act. The longer we sat there, the more I realized something. I wasn't sure if I cared anymore. "What's really going on, Sophie?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "You keep saying you're trying, but is that really what this is? Or are you just trying to get me to forgive you so you can feel better about yourself?" Sophie's eyes widened, the defensiveness creeping into her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Because here's the thing, Sophie. I've spent my entire life trying to live up to your expectations, trying to meet everyone else's standards. And I've let you walk all over me. But no more. I don't need your approval. I don't need you to define my worth. And I don't need to keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. Her face hardened, but I could see the hurt behind her eyes. For a moment, I thought she was going to lash out, but instead she took a deep breath as if steeling herself. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I've been horrible to you. I've tried to make you feel small because it made me feel better about myself. And I hate that I've done that. I hate what I've become." There was a shift in her tone, something more real this time. But even as she spoke, I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "You've made me feel less than for so long," I said, my voice rising slightly. "And I've let you. But I'm done. I'm done living under your shadow. I'm done allowing you to control how I see myself." Sophie's shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw the mask crack. She wasn't the confident, perfect sister anymore. She was just a person. A flawed, broken person who had caused a lot of pain, and had felt justified in doing so. "I don't know what else to say, Em," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I really am. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try." I felt a surge of emotion wash over me. For so long I had craved this moment, the moment when Sophie would apologize, when she would admit what she had done. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. Felt hollow. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said, the weight of the decision settling in. "But I can't keep pretending like everything's okay either." Sophie didn't respond immediately. She just nodded, the sadness in her eyes matching mine. There was no satisfaction in this moment. There was no victory. Just the uncomfortable, painful reality that we had both been living in a toxic cycle for far too long. The days after my conversation with Sophie were strangely quiet. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite shake off. We hadn't really resolved anything. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive her. Not in the way she wanted, at least. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done letting her, or anyone else, control my life. The moment she apologized should have felt like a victory, like a step toward healing. But the truth was, it didn't. It felt more like a closure I wasn't ready for. I had spent too long letting Sophie's actions dictate my self-worth, and even now, as she apologized, I felt myself wondering if it was too little, too late. I tried to move forward with my life, focusing on my plans for the business and spending time with people who valued me. But Sophie's words still echoed in my mind. Her apology wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't a magic bullet that could erase years of hurt. It was a small step, but the road ahead was still unclear. Then, it all came to a head one afternoon. I had spent the day working on my business plan, brainstorming ideas for what I could do with my bookstore and my newfound ambition to create something of my own. I was feeling pretty good, confident even, for the first time in a long time. I had the power now to create my own future, to carve out something that was truly mine. But as I walked into my living room that evening, I saw Sophie standing there, waiting for me. She had an intense look in her eyes, one I hadn't seen before. It was as though the facade she had carefully constructed for years was finally starting to crack. "I need to talk to you," Sophie said, her voice low but urgent. I raised an eyebrow, wary of what was coming. "About what?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands before meeting my gaze. "About Dad. About everything. There's something you need to know." My heart skipped a beat. The last thing I wanted to deal with was more family drama. The holidays had already been difficult enough. But the look in Sophie's eyes told me this wasn't something I could ignore. "What is it?" I asked, my voice guarded. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "You know how we've all been pretending everything is fine with Dad and Mom? The truth is, it's not. Dad has been hiding something from all of us. Something that could change everything." Froze. This was it. This was what I had been avoiding. My family had always prided itself on being close-knit, on keeping everything in-house. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we had been living in denial for years. Sophie's words were the catalyst I hadn't expected, the thing that would finally shatter the illusions we'd all been living under. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. My pulse quickened as the room seemed to close in around me. Sophie's face was pale as she stepped closer. Dad has been gambling, Blah. He's lost everything. Our family business. Everything Mom and Dad built. He's gambled it all away. My stomach dropped. What? Are you serious? Sophie nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I've tried to ignore it. I thought if I just kept pretending it would get better. But it's worse than I thought. Dad's been keeping it from all of us. And now we're at risk of losing everything. I took a step back, my head spinning. This couldn't be happening. Our family business, our legacy, was on the verge of collapse because of Dad's hidden addiction. I had always admired him, looked up to him as the strong, reliable figure in our family. The idea that he had been hiding this from us was a slap in the face. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice shaking. For years, Sophie replied softly. I only found out recently. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to make things worse. I took a few steps back, trying to process what Sophie had just said. The weight of the truth hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It wasn't just about her toxic behavior and the hurtful things she had said. This was bigger. This was a betrayal that could destroy everything my family had worked for. I felt my hands start to tremble, my mind racing. Why didn't you tell Mom? Why didn't you say something sooner? Sophie looked away, guilt written all over her face. I didn't know how. I was scared. But I can't let it keep going. We need to confront him. I was angry, furious. But I knew that this wasn't the time to let emotions control me. It wasn't the time for revenge. This was bigger than my hurt from Christmas or even Sophie's apology. This was about saving our family from crumbling under the weight of Dad's secrets. I stood there for a moment, the shock still sinking in. But then something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let this destroy everything. I wasn't going to let our family fall apart because of secrets and lies. I'll confront him, I said finally, my voice cold but determined. But not tonight. We need to think this through. Sophie nodded, relief flooding her face. Thank you, I'm sorry for everything. For the way I treated you. I don't deserve your help, but I'm glad you're here. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive Sophie. Not yet. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was taking control of my own fate. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. This was about something much bigger. Something I could no longer ignore. I would confront Dad. I would force him to face the consequences of his actions. And no matter what happened next, I would make sure that I wouldn't let this define me. I would rebuild what was broken, even if it meant breaking the chains of denial that had held my family together for far too long. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but the moment I sat across from my dad in the living room, I knew nothing could prepare me for this. The walls that had once felt like a protective shield, holding the family together, now seemed like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything I had just learned. Sophie had left the room earlier, saying she couldn't bear to be there when the conversation happened. But I had no choice. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. It was about taking control of my own future, my own life, and confronting the ugly truth that had been buried beneath the surface for so long. Dad had always been the strong one, the one who made all the right decisions, who always had everything under control. And I had always trusted him. But now, as I sat in front of him, the man I thought I knew seemed like a stranger. His hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a drink, the usual confidence gone, replaced by an unsettling vulnerability. I knew what I had to do. But that didn't make it any easier. I know about the gambling, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I know what you've been hiding from us. Dad didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the glass in his hand, swirling the whiskey around as if buying time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, filled with years of unspoken regret. I never meant for you to find out like this, he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. I wanted to protect you, all of you. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed, but I couldn't. I was too deep in it. You've been gambling everything away, I replied, the anger rising in my chest. The family business, our legacy, everything Mom and you worked for. You've been throwing it all away. I know, he muttered, his voice barely audible. And I regret it more than you'll ever understand. I didn't want this life for you, Em. I wanted you to think I had everything together. But I lost control. I thought I could stop, but I couldn't. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. And what about Mom? What about the rest of us? Don't you think we deserve to know the truth? I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. The guilt in his gaze was palpable. I didn't want you to see me as weak. I've always been the one who took care of things, the one who made sure everything was secure. I thought if I could keep you all in the dark, I could fix it. I never wanted you to see me fail. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. Well, guess what, Dad? We see it now. We see everything. You can't keep hiding behind this perfect image anymore. You've lost us so much. And you're still hiding, still trying to protect yourself. I'm not trying to protect myself, he said quietly. I'm trying to protect you. I don't want you to hate me for what I've done. I don't hate you, I said, my voice softer now. But I don't know how to forgive you. You've broken everything we worked for. Dad ran his hands through his hair, frustration and defeat etched into his face. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right. There it was, the desperation in his voice, the admission that he had no answers. He had spent years building this perfect life, this perfect facade, and now it was all crumbling in front of him. And I could see it, the realization that he couldn't undo what he had done. The weight of it hit him hard just as it hit me. For a long moment we sat there in silence. The house felt colder now, as if the very air between us had shifted. There was no easy fix to this. There was no simple apology that would make it all better. This was a mess, a complicated, painful mess. And no matter how much we wanted to ignore it, it was real. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to steady my emotions. I need you to fix this, Dad. Not for me. Not for Mom. For you. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. And you need to stop running. I don't know if I can, he whispered, his voice defeated. I've lost so much. I don't care about the money, I said, my voice firm. What matters is the family, the trust, the respect. You've been lying to us for so long. You can't keep hiding from this. I know, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. I've been weak. But I'm going to try him. I will. I don't know where to start. It was in that moment that I realized something. I didn't need my father to have all the answers. I didn't need him to fix everything for me. I needed him to take responsibility for his actions, to acknowledge the truth. And that was a step I could never make for him. I took a deep breath and stepped back from him, giving him space to process the conversation. We can't fix this overnight, I said quietly, but we can start by being honest. And by doing what's right. We have to start somewhere. For the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'll try, he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. I'll do whatever it takes. I nodded, though I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still so many steps ahead. But this was the first step. The first time in years that we were finally facing the truth, not running from it. It wasn't easy. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night conversations that stretched into the early morning. My father's confession had been the first step, but the real work was only just beginning. The family business, everything my parents had built, was on the line, and we all had to face the consequences of my father's actions. I spent hours going over the financial records with my mom, reviewing every transaction, every investment, every loss that had been hidden for years. It was a mess. A tangled web of lies, manipulations, and poor decisions. I had never imagined that this was what lay beneath the surface. I had thought my family's wealth was secure, that we were untouchable. But in reality, everything had been teetering on the edge of collapse for far too long. The hardest part was watching my mom struggle to come to terms with the truth. She had been blind to it all, caught up in the illusion of the perfect family. She had always trusted my dad, always believed that he would fix things, that he would protect them. Now, she was left to pick up the pieces of a broken dream. And Sophie, well, she wasn't much help. She had tried to act like everything was fine, like she could fix it all with a few kind words, a few more apologies. But deep down, I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew what she had done to me, what we had all done to each other, and the weight of it was starting to sink in. But I wasn't focusing on Sophie. I was focusing on what mattered. Fixing what had been broken. I had spent so many years trying to make things right for everyone else, but now I was doing it for me. I was no longer going to sit back and let my family's mistakes define me. I wasn't going to let my father's failures drag me down, and I wasn't going to let Sophie's jealousy or passive-aggressive behavior take away my sense of self. As I worked with Mom, I started to see that my role in the family had to change. I wasn't just the daughter anymore. I wasn't just the sister who tried to keep the peace. I was a leader now, and I had to step up. There was no more time for indecision, no more time for feeling sorry for myself. One afternoon, as we were sitting in the living room, going over another round of business records, Mom finally spoke up. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. I've been so focused on holding this family together, and I didn't even see what was happening. I didn't see the toll it was taking on you, on everyone. I looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. Mom, you couldn't have known. You were dealing with your own stuff too. We all were. She shook her head. But that's the problem, isn't it? We've all been living in this bubble, pretending that everything is fine, that we can't fall apart. But look at us now. Look at what we've lost. I felt a surge of emotion. We can rebuild, Mom. It's not over. We've still got each other, and we still have the foundation of what this family was built on. We can fix this. Mom looked at me, her eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. But we can't do it alone, Em. I can't do it alone. Your father. He's too far gone to fix this on his own. And that was when I realized the full extent of what my dad had done. He hadn't just gambled away money or investments. He had gambled away his family, his trust, his integrity. And now, he had to face the consequences of his actions. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep letting this drag on. We needed to make changes. We needed to confront the reality of what had happened, not just sweep it under the rug like we always had. The next day I called a family meeting. It was time to face the truth, to stop pretending that everything would be fine if we just kept going along with the same routine. I wasn't going to allow us to keep living in this toxic cycle. We sat around the table, my mom, Dad, Sophie, and me. Dad looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. He had been through hell, but so had all of us. It was time for him to own up to what he had done. I know I've let you down, Dad said, his voice rough. I know I've ruined everything. And I don't know if I can fix it. But I want to try. I want to make things right, even if it takes everything I've got. My mom spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. We've been living a lie, hiding from the truth for too long. But the truth is, Em is right. We have to rebuild. And we can't do it alone. Sophie was silent throughout the conversation, her eyes fixed on the table. She hadn't spoken much since that night we had confronted Dad, but I knew she was processing everything. I could see the shame in her eyes, but also the regret. She had been so caught up in her own life, in her own jealousy and insecurities, that she had failed to see the bigger picture. But now she was finally facing it. I want to be better, Sophie said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I've treated you both terribly, and I know I can't take it all back. But I want to help. I want to make up for the things I've done. I looked at her, the anger I had felt for so long simmering under the surface. But this time it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making Sophie pay for what she had done. It was about moving forward, about healing the wounds that had been festering for too long. You don't have to make up for everything, Sophie, I said softly. We all have a role to play in this. But it's going to take time. We have to work together. And we have to face the consequences of everything that's happened. No more hiding. No more pretending. The room fell silent as we all sat there, absorbing what had been said. There was no quick fix, no magic solution. This was going to take time, effort, and a lot of hard work. But we had to start somewhere. And this was it. The days after the family meeting were filled with a sense of uneasy optimism. We had confronted the truth, but now came the harder part, rebuilding everything we had lost. Trust, stability, and the sense of unity that had once held our family together. These weren't things that could be fixed with a simple apology or a few well-meaning words. Rebuilding took time, effort, and, most importantly, a commitment to change. For my dad, it was a painful process. Every day was a reminder of how far he had fallen, how much he had jeopardized. I could see the guilt weighing on him. His tired eyes, the way he seemed to age by the day. It wasn't just the money he had lost. It was the years of lies, the broken promises. For the first time in a long time, my father didn't seem invincible. He was human and he had failed us. But despite his failure, I could see something else in him. He was trying. He was attending therapy, talking to a counselor about his gambling problem, something he had refused to do for years. It wasn't easy for him, but he was finally taking responsibility for his actions, for the first time in a long time. Sophie, too, was working on herself. She had started seeing a therapist, trying to understand her behavior, the jealousy and bitterness that had plagued her for years. She was slowly starting to change, but I wasn't ready to fully trust her. The road ahead was long for both of us, but I could see the effort she was putting in, even if it didn't make up for everything she had done. For my mom, it was harder. She had spent years turning a blind eye to the cracks in our family, convinced that if she just held everything together, it would all work out. But now, she had to face the reality that she had been complicit in the facade. I could see the toll it was taking on her. The sadness in her eyes. The way she carried herself with a quiet resignation. She had been hurt, betrayed by the one person she had trusted most. And now she was trying to heal from that. I spent a lot of time with her, trying to rebuild the bond that had weakened over the years. We went out for coffee, had long talks about our family, and slowly started to re-establish the closeness that we once had. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was a start. But through it all, I found myself growing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was finally taking control of my life. The business I had been working on for months was starting to take shape, and with each step forward, I felt more confident. I had been so focused on everyone else for so long that I had lost sight of my own dreams. But now I was working towards something that was mine, something I could build on my own terms. The bookstore was evolving into something more. I had started a small community program where people could come together to share books, ideas, and stories. It wasn't just about selling books anymore. It was about creating a space where people could connect, where they could find solace in something as simple as a good story. I had found my purpose again, and that was more than I could have asked for. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office at the bookstore when I received a call from Sophie. She had been quiet for a few days, and I hadn't expected to hear from her. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" I sighed, knowing that the conversation we needed to have wasn't going to be easy. "Sure. What's up?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Sophie began. "About rebuilding. And I know I've got a long way to go, but I want you to know that I'm really trying, Em. I want to be better for you, for Mom, for Dad. I don't want to lose you." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but a part of me was still guarded. I wasn't ready to trust her completely, but I could hear the effort in her words. That was a step. "I appreciate that, Sophie," I said, my voice steady. "I do. But you need to understand something. It's not going to be easy. I can't just forget everything that's happened. But I'm willing to give you a chance. A real chance to prove you can change." She was quiet for a moment. "I will. I swear I will." We talked for a while longer about our family, about the future, about how we could start over. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving toward something better. Something that didn't revolve around anger or resentment. As the weeks passed, our family continued to heal. It wasn't a smooth road. There were still moments of doubt, of anger, of frustration. But we were working through it piece by piece. My father was attending his meetings, Sophie was actively working on herself, and Mom and I were growing closer every day. And for me, I was finally embracing the life I wanted. I wasn't living in the shadows anymore, trying to please everyone else. I was living for me. I was building something that mattered, something that would last. I wasn't just reclaiming my family. I was reclaiming myself. One evening, after a long day of meetings at the bookstore, I sat down at my desk, looking out the window at the fading light. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The weight that had been on my shoulders for years, because of Sophie, because of my father, because of the lies and secrets, was slowly starting to lift. I had been through so much, and yet, here I was, standing on my own 2 feet. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time I didn't feel afraid of it. I had taken control. I had rebuilt from the wreckage. And no matter what happened, I knew I was stronger for it. Time, it seemed, had become both a healer and a test. The last few months had given me enough space to think, to process, and most importantly, to make choices. I wasn't just choosing to rebuild my relationship with my family or my career. I was choosing myself. I had spent so many years trying to fix things for everyone else. But now, after everything, after the confrontation with Sophie, the painful revelations about Dad, the endless hours spent untangling our family's mess, I realized that the most important thing was to stop living in the shadows. I wasn't going to let the past dictate who I was anymore. The bookstore had become more than just a business to me. It had become a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and find peace. I had finally started to see the fruits of my labor, the events we had hosted, the growing sense of community, the way people were beginning to trust me and my vision. I had created something that mattered not just for me but for others. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of something that I had built on my own terms. But as things were starting to feel stable, a new challenge emerged. Sophie called me one morning, her voice shaky, urgent. I need you to meet me. It's important. Please. I had been on edge for days, not knowing what to expect. Our last conversation had been civil, even somewhat hopeful. But I knew Sophie, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever she was about to drop on me. Still, I agreed to meet her at a local cafe, not knowing how much this conversation would change everything. When I arrived, Sophie was sitting at a corner table, her hands fidgeting with a napkin in front of her. She looked different. There was a tension in her expression that I hadn't seen in a while. Something was wrong. "I'm sorry to drag you into this," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think you need to know something." I sat down slowly, my heart pounding. "What is it, Sophie?" She took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words. "It's about Dad. He hasn't been honest with you. With any of us. He's been hiding more than just his gambling problem. There's more debt. Worse debts than we ever realized. And I think he's involved in something bigger than we know." My stomach dropped. My thoughts raced, trying to process what Sophie was saying. Was this some sort of manipulation? Hadn't we just started to move past all of this? "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady but my pulse quickening. "I found some documents," she continued, looking guilty. "And I think Dad might be mixed up with some shady people. He's been borrowing money from them, big sums. I think he's in deeper than he's letting on. And I'm scared." The air around me seemed to thin as the reality of what Sophie was saying hit me. My father, the man who had been the rock of our family, who had always seemed untouchable, was in trouble again. And this time, it wasn't just a matter of fixing his mistakes. It was about protecting everyone in the family from the fallout of his actions. I felt the old urge rise up in me, the need to fix things, to protect everyone, to make sure that no one would get hurt. But I had already learned something important. I couldn't save everyone. Not anymore. "Sophie," I said slowly, my voice firm. I don't know what Dad's involved in, but I'm not going to let this destroy us again. We've been through enough, and I'm not going to watch him drag us into another mess. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to do, Em. I'm scared. Paused, taking a deep breath. This was the moment that I had been preparing for. This was the final test. I could have let the fear consume me. I could have given in to the old patterns of trying to save everyone. But this time I knew better. I'm going to talk to Dad, I said, my voice steady. I'll confront him. But this time it's not about fixing everything. It's about protecting ourselves. We can't keep pretending we're fine. He has to face the consequences of what he's done. Sophie nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know if we can fix this. I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. We can't fix everything. But we can move forward. We have to choose to move forward. The meeting with my father wasn't easy. But it was necessary. When I confronted him, he looked defeated. A far cry from the man who had once seemed larger than life. I laid out everything Sophie had told me, the debts, the people he was involved with, and the impact it was having on the family. For a long time he didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the ground, unable to look me in the eye. I never wanted this for you, he said finally. His voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could handle it, that I could fix it without anyone knowing. I didn't want you to see me like this. I took a deep breath, my heart aching. Dad, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of us. We can't keep going on like this, pretending everything is fine when it's not. He nodded, finally meeting my eyes. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Guilt, regret, maybe even shame. I'm sorry, Em. I don't know what else to say. I stood up, my hands shaking as I made my way to the door. You can start by making it right, Dad. You have to stop hiding. You have to face what you've done. I walked out of that house with a sense of finality, knowing that I had done everything I could. I wasn't going to fix my father's mistakes. I wasn't going to carry the burden of his secrets anymore. I had already carried enough for a lifetime. But I wasn't walking away from him. I wasn't giving up on our family entirely. I just couldn't be the one to save him anymore. I couldn't be the one to fix everything. In the weeks that followed, I learned a powerful truth. True freedom wasn't about getting everyone to see things your way or fixing the broken parts of your family. It wasn't about the revenge I had once thought I needed. It was about standing firm in your own choices, refusing to let the chaos of the past define your future. It was a slow process, but I could feel the change inside me, and it was liberating. The more I focused on my business, on my growth, the more I realized that I had the power to define my own future. The business was thriving, people were coming in not just for books, but for the community we were building. The simple joy of being able to provide a safe space for others had become my purpose. It wasn't flashy or glamorous, but it was everything I had wanted. I had finally found my place in this world. Sophie and I kept in touch, but the relationship was no longer one where I needed to carry the burden of her actions. She had started attending therapy more regularly and was beginning to make significant changes. I could see her trying to change, but I wasn't ready to fully trust her again. I didn't need to. I didn't need to bend to anyone's standards anymore. Sophie's apology and our conversations had been a start, but they didn't erase everything that had happened. They didn't fix years of rivalry and manipulation, and they certainly didn't erase the pain she had caused me. But I didn't need her approval. I didn't need to keep running the race I had been running all these years, trying to meet expectations that were never truly mine. As for my dad, the road to redemption was much longer. He hadn't magically solved everything with a few sincere words. He had to face the consequences of his actions. Not just the financial ruin he had caused, but the emotional scars he had left on the family. He started attending meetings and even confessed to Mom about everything he had hidden. I couldn't be the one to fix him, but I wasn't going to turn my back on him either. The relationship was slowly being rebuilt piece by piece, but it would take time. He had to learn to live with the guilt and the damage he had caused, and I had to learn how to not let it consume me. The family wasn't fixed overnight. It couldn't be. But we were learning to live with the brokenness. We were learning to move forward, together and apart, finding new ways to connect while acknowledging the things that had been shattered. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to bend to anyone else's expectations. I wasn't the perfect daughter. I wasn't the perfect sister. But I was enough. I stood in the bookstore one evening, watching the sun set through the window, and I realized how far I had come. I had been living under the shadow of my family's dysfunction for so long, but now I was finally stepping into the light. The road had been long and filled with pain, but it had also been one of growth, strength, and self-discovery. I had learned that I didn't need to fix everything. I just needed to find my own path. And I had. The next step was mine to take. It was no longer about what had been done to me, or about what I had to fix. It was about what I could build, what I could create for myself. It was about living for me. As I closed up the bookstore that night, I realized that I was ready for whatever the future held. The pain from the past didn't define me anymore. The lies, the secrets, the hurt, they were all a part of the journey, but they weren't the end of the story. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had already proven it to myself.